Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome all the officials here present from the Auditor General's Department. I certainly want to welcome members of the public, general public who are here. I don't think we have a presence here today. And certainly also the members of the media who usually transmit to the public their understanding of what important issues transpire during these meetings. My name is Boindra Dutt Tiwari. I'm the chair of this committee, and my other members will state their names so that the public will be aware of who are on the committee. The purpose of this meeting of the Public Accounts Committee is to discuss the Auditor General's report for the year 2017, which takes us to the end of the fiscal year, September 2017. That is this report, 2017. That is this report. Now, this is an opportunity to basically to discuss with the Auditor General's Department the report of the Auditor General. And the purpose is, at the end of the discussion, to make recommendation that will help the Auditor General's Department, that will assist the ministries and departments to improve their delivery of services in an efficient, effective, and economic manner. So that is what we are going to do today. I am grateful that the Auditor General's office is here present. I'm sorry that the Auditor General is not here, but I did have a preliminary meeting with him prior to this meeting because he is out of the country now. And we will begin the discussion by having a presentation from the Auditor General's Department by the acting head.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. We at the Auditor General's Department welcome this interaction and this engagement with the members of the Public Accounts Committee. We appreciate that we are one of the key inputs of data to the Public Accounts Committee, and that on the basis of what we have to say, that you are there to help not only the Auditor General's Department, but to ensure that good governance and good accountability is achieved throughout the public service. And so at this point in time, I will just briefly introduce myself, and I will let my colleagues introduce themselves here forth. I am Laurelie Pujadas, Deputy Auditor General, and at present, Acting Auditor General.
I'm Gayatri Maharaj, Assistant Auditor General.
Good morning, Neela Dwargali, Audit Director.
Good morning, Gary Peters, Assistant Auditor General.
Good morning, Rajkumari Mohammed, Audit Executive 2, Acting.
Good morning, Brian Caesar, Acting Audit Executive 2.
Okay. Okay, and the members of my committee will now introduce themselves. You could start with Senator, if you want.
Morning, everyone. Lester Henry, member.
Good morning, everyone. I am Randall Mitchell, member.
Hi, good morning. I'm Ayana Webster Roy, member.
Good morning, Taharko Bika, Vice Chair.
Member Gopi Schoon, good morning.
Good morning, Melissa Ramkisoon, member.
Okay, and I am Boindra Dutt Tiwari. I introduced myself already, chair of the committee. And this morning, we'll begin by asking you some general questions. I'll start the ball rolling, and each member will ask questions to their need and satisfaction. And the forthrightness of the discussion, I think, will help to determine the quality of the discussion and also the value to the general public. Now, we find in the Auditor General's report for 2017 a number of recurring issues, all right? The first one is the condition of the internal audit function throughout the ministerial system, and it seems to be a recurring matter because we've had that over and over, and it persists. Secondly, we have the issue of ISMIS, the Integrated Financial Management System, which has been on the books for some years. And the objective of that is to try to integrate financial management and create a system that could be live so that you can look at both, you can look at public expenditure and the allocation of public expenditure and its deployment on a timely basis, that is to say, on a day-to-day basis, looking at both operational and development expenditure, and that we are not sure about the progress on that, and it remains and persists as an issue. And before going on anymore, I wonder if you can comment or respond on the issue of the continuing and persistent weaknesses in the internal audit systems across the system, it seems, and the challenge of getting this ISMIS program done and implemented so that the country can benefit from it, because the country as a whole will benefit from it if we had an integrated financial management system.
I will take the lead on this one, and then I will pass it over to my two Assistant Auditor Generals to have a discussion. Yes, the issue and challenges of the internal audit function continues to be a pervasive one throughout the public service. We have discussed this not only in this report, but we take note of the recent developments that is being undertaken by the Ministry of Finance in terms of the Public Financial Management Monetization Unit. They have begun some work with regard to the internal audit reform. And this is not really, we take recognition that steps are being done to improve the internal audit function, and that something is being done. But at present, we are still challenged to be able to rely and put reliance on the work of some of the internal auditors within the public service. And we have highlighted that in terms of their competencies, in terms of their qualifications, in terms of them even understanding what the role of the internal audit is in modern day times. At this point in time, I would let Mr. Peters add if anything that he wishes to add, and Ms. Mirage to add.
One thing to remember, although we are seeing progress being made by the control of accounts, it will take some time before any benefits can be seen. So it's something that we have to keep an eye on closely and hope that things move a little bit faster.
This is for internal audit?
Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, how can we make this matter urgent and therefore get some action on it? Because you've highlighted it before. And this committee has on 2 occasions recommended the strengthening. We've had responses that they, of course, will do something about it, and they are attending to it with training and stuff like that. But what can we do to make something happen that is valuable? Because a lot of other issues stem from that. Because when the ministry is late on certain things, or when you have mistakes, or when you have problems that come out of it, I mean, your first port of call is really this internal audit function within the ministry. I'm asking you to help us to understand how we could make it work.
Yeah. The last update we got from the Comptroller of Accounts was they are seeking to hire a consultant to help them strengthen the internal audit across the ministries,
okay.
Right? And they are hoping to do this within by this month. And the next step is to do a transformational plan and start training and recruiting and all of that. So that's where they are with it.
Okay. Yeah, you wanted to add something? Yeah.
Yes. In improving the internal audit, you have a lot of key players involved as well, like the CPO's office, probably Director of Personal Administration. They need to be on board from the very beginning. I think that would help things along tremendously when you have to develop new job descriptions and so on. Once you have these things done on a timely basis, everything would fall into place at a quicker pace.
Okay, is it bottleneck at the CPO's office? Do you know? Would you be able to say?
No, I wouldn't have any details on that.
Okay. But you think, yeah, you wanted to say
Yes,
something?
I'd just like to add, we had discussions with Ministry of Public Admin, and they have indicated that they will work with Control of Accounts and the Service Commissions to ensure that the internal audit is properly staffed.
Would it help if we wrote as one of our recommendations to the Ministry of Public Administration that they treat this matter as a matter of urgency and to emphasize the critical need for doing it? Would that help?
Yes, that most certainly will help. We would appreciate that, yes. Thank you.
Okay, so the appropriate ministry would be Public Administration?
Yes.
Okay, what about the isthmus thing? Would somebody like to pick that up and let us know? This is the integrated financial management system. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
For the benefit of the public, the government, that's to say, government as government of Trinidad and Tobago, has been for some time trying to establish an integrated financial management system that would allow senior officials, including permanent secretaries and the ministers, to be able to go into the system online and know on a daily basis how money is being spent, both for recurrent and for developmental expenditure. And this integrated system would help a lot in the management of the budget and management of the business of government on a daily basis. But this has not been done, and it has taken some time, and we don't even know how far it has progressed by now. But it's an essential system for good government and good governance. And that is what we are inquiring about. Yeah.
Chair, we recognize that the integrated financial management system is key to providing good governance and accountability. It would also help facilitate, from an audit perspective, easier interrogation of information, as a lot of that information will be electronically based. And therefore, we would hope to also have access to that information. We do believe, however, that the Ministry of Finance, coupled with the Controller of Accounts, has moved forward with the process of acquiring the IFMIS system. In terms of what challenges they're facing, we believe it's better served if the chair would re-ask that question to the Controller of Accounts and to the Ministry of Finance, because I think they would be in a better position to advise this particular committee as to exactly where they are in the process.
Okay, I will ask my other colleagues if they will ask questions at this point. I have many more questions, but in order to give my colleagues a chance to ask theirs, I will start with Senator Ramkissoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is in relation to the limitations of the scope that was outlined by the Auditor General reports before us. And one of the issues that was outlined was a legal opinion, but it was backdated since the 18th of September 2013. Now this report is 2016 to 2017. So I'd just like some clarification on how this appeared under the limitations of scope for the Ministry of Finance and Inland Revenue Division, as listed by your good self.
I would let my colleagues speak on that, but there is a limitation of scope in terms of completeness of information, in terms of revenue gathered. In order to fully assess whether or not revenue has been completely gathered, we would need access to particular information, taxpayers' information. However, the legislation at this time would debar us from having that particular access, and therefore that is one of the reasons why the limitation of scope has been concluded. Mr. Peters?
And for that reason, we will not be able to say with any level of certainty if that figure can be accepted as fairly stated. Because we don't have any access to the underlying records, or we'll have to actually drill down to the individual taxpayer.
So which figure you will be alluding to? This Ministry of Finance figure that was audited?
Board of
for the
Inland
20
Revenue.
Taxation.
Okay, so the Inland Revenue Division.
Yeah.
Okay. It was also noted that, first, jumping ahead a little bit for your report, you had noted a lot of state enterprises and their last audited financial reports as of January 2018, as well as the audited financial statements that were not laid in Parliament, as well as the total subventions received for the periods not reported on. And this table was to give the committee an idea of for example, if we look at the National Schools Dietary Services Limited, looking at the last audited financial statements 2016, the audited financial statement not laid in Parliament 30th of September 2016, and total subventions received for the period not reported on was in the amount of 200 million. That is what you all were able to. You want to make a comment about that?
Okay, we asked the Ministry of Finance to provide this information, so we just presented it in a summary. When coming back down to National Schools Dietary Services, the only outstanding statement would be until year ending 2017. And when you look at the amount of money that the subvention that went to that company, 200 million, it's quite a lot, and it has not been accounted for in terms of financial statements, audited financial statements being submitted to the Ministry of Finance.
That was for the period 2016-2017,
Yes.
$200 million.
Yes.
So it's an unaudited
Yes.
document. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could you please update us on the status of the Public Financial Management Modernization Unit? I know that this is key to improving and reforming the public financial management system. Could you please update us as to where this is?
Member, I think that the Control of Accounts would be in a better position to give an update on the functioning and the status of the unit and how far they have reached with the system.
Notwithstanding, but you did do an audit, and perhaps at that time, what in your view was holding back this project?
This whole unit would be the subject of an audit of the IDB loan. We just accepted the appointment as auditors of this project, but we will not be able to get into the details until we start the audit of the project.
Okay, I accept that. But there's another matter which I want to raise, which was one related to the establishment of the Aviation Institute at UTT in Camden, and where I noticed that there were contracts with 2 construction firms totaling $10 million, and these contracts were not produced for audit. Could you perhaps give us any details on that?
Okay, I think you're making reference to page 39, paragraph 2.63. Am I correct? Right. In respect of that, I think our officers were trying to ascertain they recognize that there is cabinet approval for the project, but what they expected to see when they went out is that the entity that was making the payments would actually have a copy of the contract on hand to ensure that the payments were being made in accordance with the terms of the contract. And they were unable, those particular contracts apparently were not available to be viewed at that point in time, and we therefore thought it prudent that entities that are engaging in payments of contracts of any nature on any side should always seek to ensure that the necessary documentation is on hand, and therefore to ensure that compliance is being made with the terms and conditions of the contract. I don't know if anyone of the other officers would want to add anything else.
Just to say that it's very concerning, and it's a matter that has to be dealt into a little deeper.
Okay, we agree and we take note of that, and we will send it to the relevant officer who has actually made this particular observation that going forward, they may need to delving into it a little bit, Mr. Caesar.
Could I ask MP Webster Roy if she would pursue?
Hi, good morning again. I wanted to turn to the pervasive issues and my favorite topic, pensions and separation benefits. Could you explain just to the public the process? Because most times when people come to constituency office, they will say, well, I was told it's still at the Auditor General office, or I was told it's still in Trinidad. So could you just outline the process so that the public could understand, and then say what are some of your challenges?
I just want to draw attention that the Auditor General's Department is the last port in which a person's pension assessment is verified. I would also draw to attention that we are doing this verification is not an audit. This is a verification of a pension and leave records and computation entitlements under the civil service regulations. As part of that process, what is required in accordance with the regulations is that each ministry and each department is supposed to have annual pension and leave records done for officers every year. These are supposed to be submitted to the Controller of Accounts Treasury Division for verification. At that point, if it is done on a timely basis, issues and challenges relating to a person's service, i.e., maybe they have been overpaid, underpaid, perhaps something has not been properly reflected on the pension and leave record, would be adjusted at that point. And therefore, when it comes to when a person is about to retire, there would be no issues, and the person would be able to have their computation done in a timely manner. However, what you have found that over the years, officers' pension and leave records oftentimes do not follow them when they move from ministry to ministry, department to department, nor do most ministries, and there are some ministries that are actually very flagrant with that, they do not actually prepare the pension and leave records for officers. So what you find is an officer like myself who's about to exit from the service, you will find that they rush at the end of my career to try and do update my pension and leave record, at which point they may have found that I might have been overpaid in 90 or year ho. It has to go back to the relevant ministry or the department in which I was overpaid for that to be adjusted. They may have to find the records pertaining to me for that particular ministry or department, which may not exist in that department because that department may now have moved from the Ministry of Education, it may have gone to the Ministry of Public Administration, it may now be back to the Ministry of Education. So the record is just roaming all over the place. So these are some of the challenges. So the challenges actually start long before they reach either the Treasury Division or the Auditor General's Department. Generally, in most cases, when you find that officers are suffering, it is because their particular line ministry have not prepared the relevant document, which is the pension and leave record, to facilitate the computation and the verification of their gratuity entitlements and their pension entitlements. And those are that is really the key challenge that is faced in terms of the preparation of someone's computation. I don't know if I've been clear enough.
That it's helpful, and thank you very much. If you could make a recommendation to members of the public and also ministries and departments to help to improve the process and to speed it up, what would you suggest?
Ms. Roy, going forward, those officers who have come in, let's say, 2005, going forward, you find when they are going to be retired, it would be not to be the same extent because their records and their information is on the electronic IRIS system. So from day one, their information has been there. For an officer like myself, they would have inputted the data for me, and the data inputted may not have been accurate. So therefore, when they do a printout from the module to say that I am due to be retired and this is my status of my thing, it may be missing information. And then you have to go back to the source records, which are, for a 33 and a 30-year career, that could be very difficult and time-consuming to obtain. So I think over time it's going to improve, but at the present time, for officers who are exiting, it is still difficult, and what would need to be required is that at least over a 5-year period, an officer within the next 5 years are going to be retired. Ministries and departments must seek as a matter of priority to ensure that those officers are known and that their pension and leave records are brought up to date, and information that is missing is sought to be achieved from the relevant department from which that officer's information is missing, and get that information across the Treasury so that they can verify it in advance, because oftentimes when ministries do it, and the internal audit of their ministries have verified it, sometimes when it reaches by Treasury, because of their expertise and because of their experience, they may also see where information is gaps are missing. And so it would be a good idea, at least within not a 5-year period, that at least officers due to retire within the next 5 years, that their information as a matter of priority is brought up to date, their pension and leave records, because that is your source document for computation. All right?
From what year would public servants be included on the online the IRIS system?
We're all on the IRIS system, but it's just that if you came into employment when the IRIS, and I can't remember the exact date. Neela, can you read? I think it's 2005 when the IRIS system became live. At that point, an employee who is now entering the service, their information would have been entered live. And any employee before that, their information, I believe there was a committee that was under which the Service Commission at the time was responsible for. They took the initiative to have a committee and a group, and they inputted the data for all the public servants that was in existence at that point.
So the difficulty would be for employees prior to 2005?
Yes.
Okay. Could I ask Minister Mitchell, member? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to take you directly to the matter of the diplomatic bag system. So the Auditor General's department, you all also have the responsibility of auditing systems. And in your report, you would have identified a significant weakness in the movement of the diplomatic bag, in that there is a system of receiving duplicate schedules as acknowledgement of receipt of the bag and its contents. And you would have observed that you could not find the records of at least 4 occasions, on 4 occasions when the duplicate schedules were not seen. Can you please describe what this weakness could mean for Trinidad and Tobago with respect to the abuse, the potential for abuse?
Senator, I would just want to make 2 comments. We audit the ministries, the overseas foreign affairs, and as part of that auditing of the foreign affairs, we would do a sample of the overseas missions. It is not our mandate to audit the overseas mission. In fact, that mandate is vested with the Control of Accounts, the Treasury Division. They have an app, they have a vote, and they are actually the body that is responsible for ensuring that systems are in place and functioning at all times. What we do is when we audit and we highlight certain risks, in this particular case, it was in a particular mission that we attended. I'm not sure if it's pervasive because it was a sample of 3, and this particular thing was found in 1 embassy. So I wouldn't want to extrapolate that across the board to indicate that it's a pervasive issue. However, it is a risk. It's an internal control risk, because the risk is that the diplomatic seal could be used and utilized in with unauthorized packages, and that, of course, is a significant risk. And so, therefore, it is behoovant upon the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as the missions, as well as Treasury, to ensure that the controls that have been developed, because there are controls pertaining to those things, are compliant with. And so therefore they should, and therefore we are highlighting this for this particular entity. It is up to the ministry and for the Controller of Accounts to determine whether or not it is a pervasive issue across the board. But it is a risk.
Have you seen controls, written, documented
There are
controls?
guidelines, yes, there are guidelines, yes.
Okay, and let's go to the issue of the non-submission of documents and the non-response to memoranda. It would be the accounting officer who would be ultimately responsible for the non-submission of documents and memoranda.
Which paragraph you're making reference to?
No, I'm on the issue of non-submission of documents, non-submission of memoranda. So
Thank you, Judge.
I am on page 19, non-submission of documents, non-submission to memoranda.
Senators, could you repeat your question for me, please? I
Yeah, so
apologize.
is it that the accounting officer is ultimately responsible for the non-submission of documents, non-response to memoranda?
I think if you look at the chain of command, yes, the accounting officer is the ultimate responsibility for that, yes.
Right. Is there any way of method to sanction the accounting officer for the non-submission of documents?
We do not have any authority to sanction at this point in time, but I don't know if the committee, in when they deliberate with the various ministries and departments, I think the committee would have a much stronger role in that regard than the Auditor General's department.
So at this time, there's really nothing that you can do where an accounting officer decides not to submit a response?
Well, we can only report the non-submission of the document, and hopefully subsequent discussions with the PAC would resolve those issues.
Okay.
On that matter of non-compliance, late submissions, etc., remember this had come up in this committee before, and we made a recommendation that the Auditor General, in fact, engage the Attorney General's office in order to see whether some kinds of clear sanctions could be imposed, so that, let's say, if you did not comply, there could be a fine, and for each month that you did not comply, the fines would increase until you complied. We got a response from the Ministry of Finance which indicated that those kinds of matters would be addressed not by the Auditor General but by the Ministry of Finance. And so we will try to take that into account in our recommendations this time in responding on that particular issue. So, Member Mitchell, if you have any recommendations in that regard, or you can help us to strengthen, I think that would be also valuable. Okay, Senator Henry.
Yes, morning. My first issue is just to get an update on the thorny issue of the relationship with the BIR and the Auditor General. Could you give us a state of play of that? Because after we spoke about it last year, we probably didn't think we'll still be talking about it this year again. We thought it.
To Mr. Peters, but I would say that we have reached a standstill.
Well, we have
You
a
have-
very
you have-
good working relationship with the BIR. It's just the matter of the access to the underlying records is still a problem. And they're holding fast to that privacy section in the Act.
So can we be clear that they're holding fast to the privacy, to the application of the privacy rule or law or whatever they consider it? But what is needed for it to change?
We did have discussions with the Attorney General and the Board of Inland Revenue on this matter, and there were certain amendments to the secrecy provisions that were proposed. We haven't heard anything back from them since, this was last year sometime.
You all right? On that, if I could follow up on that matter, I noticed that the Auditor General had an interview in the Sunday Express, and he highlighted a number of issues in relation to this report. But one of the things he highlighted was that particular issue of Inland Revenue, Board of Inland Revenue, and the denial of data because of the privacy considerations. I want to ask a question. It really is based on the Income Tax Amendment Bill, which was recently laid in Parliament. And I think that you all would be aware, members of the Auditor General's office would be aware of what might be in that particular bill. Based on what had transpired in the public accounts involvement with you and some of the issues involved between the BIR on the one hand and the Auditor General's report, our recommendation was that the Auditor General meet with the Board of Inland Revenue under the auspices of the Ministry of the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs. And the idea was to try to see if, we could find a way forward. Now, we have this Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018 in Parliament. Do you know if this matter is addressed there? Is it?
Scrutinize that particular bill in Parliament, so I would not want to answer yea or nay to that question.
So you don't know what the situation is. Would you take a look at it? It
Yes.
doesn't, after we leave here.
And we would report back to
Simply
you.
indicate to us whether, and also if you can suggest what might be the amendment that would be desirable in order to facilitate this process, because there are two problematic issues. One is for you to get the information, and the second thing is for the privacy of individual taxpayers or corporate taxpayers to be protected properly.
Correct.
So if you can suggest that, maybe we can see if the matter cannot be addressed legislatively.
Well, what we could put forward to you is the amendment that was proposed.
Right.
And then we would also look at the bill to see if, in fact, any idea of the amendment has been incorporated in the bill.
Okay. Thank you very much. Senator Tejada.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are really around Chapter 3, accounts of receivers of revenue. Now, on page 53, we are saying that paragraph 3.9, regarding the Ministry's inability, as Ministry of Energy's inability to determine the veracity of production data submitted by the oil and gas extraction companies. Has there been any interim update on that? And how grave a situation can this be, or is it something, what are the opinions on that?
I will just take the lead and then I will let you off, Brian. Mr. Caesar, the Ministry of Energy has been making attempts, and in their response to us in terms of an update, because we did ask for an update as to whether or not the situation still stands. The situation still stands. However, they are seeking to develop an instrument in which they would be able to better calibrate the data so that they would have better informed production data information coming forward. Mr. Caesar?
The Ministry of Energy has been making some attempts to address the situation, However, to date, they have not really made any tangible changes as far as the way they operate as to verifying that production data. So as it is, they still depend on what they call the honor system, whereby the operators, whether they be the oil and gas operators or the quarrying operators, to submit what they call production data. And they do the calculations of the royalty based on what is submitted by the production companies. So it's in terms of management, basically you cannot manage properly what is not measured. If the ministry is not doing proper measurement, therefore we are not in a position to determine exactly what is the real revenue as far as royalty is concerned that's supposed to be accrued to the ministry. So that honor system, we have told them about it, and they're still in a process where they have to come to some better arrangement as far as determining the truthfulness of production data submitted by the extraction companies.
I think, thanks for the submission, but I'm mortified hearing the response. In fact, given the situation that the Minister of Finance finds himself in every budget and media review, I think a strong recommendation, given international best practice, what obtains in other energy-producing countries regarding the Auditor General's Department, a recommendation of such type could be tabled to us. I'm requesting, if that is possible, if that's within the purview of the Research Department, of your esteemed and very important institution, Trinidad and Tobago, to submit that to us. Maybe the Ministry of Energy is not so strengthened institutionally, so that the Ministry of Energy can have the teeth. For example, if you speak to industry practitioners, they will tell you that the energy companies actually dissuade persons within their structure from not disclosing, but measuring wells of below certain volumes. So even the reserves data is inadequate, because the ministry wouldn't have access to that, because the energy companies will not go further in terms of exploring that information. And there seems to be asymmetric information in the industry, and it's not in the favor of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So I think given where you all are, and given the repeated attempts you all have been making over the years, if you all can produce some kind of best practice way of accounting for this thing, so that the people of Trinidad and Tobago can know what is under the ground and what has been produced. I want to go to our next point, and you can. But I want to go to our next point, given that regarding the Comptroller of Customs and Excise, Ministry of Finance, and on the same page, and paragraph 3.14, there are some issues regarding the cash books not being balanced, and I didn't see any report from the ministry, from BIR regarding that. Now, if you come from a financial service, in the financial service sector, as I have, you know that staff who don't balance their tills don't leave until it's balanced. And when it's complete and you realize that there's a shortfall, it comes out of someone's pay. So is it that can we get any kind of idea as to what the Auditor General Department is doing to get Comptroller to do their part, to account for the cash under their care?
Well, when we conduct these surveys, any weaknesses, we send a management letter to the relevant body. In this case, would have been the Comptroller of Customs and Excise. You will notice that we went on 2 separate dates, and the situation remained the same. So clearly, nothing was. There was no improvement. So another management letter was sent. So in the end, it will be up to the head of the organization to institute the relevant changes.
All right.
May I speak to that, please? I just wanted to speak to, just clarifying the first request that you made. You would like us to present to the committee a document that highlights best practice across the board with regard to the auditing of the energy sector where it relates to royalties? Is that what you're requesting?
What I'm asking is, given the remit of your institution, if within your remit it's to communicate to the Ministry of Energy or to Cabinet, then if you can do that. If it's also within your remit to communicate to Parliament, then we would benefit from that. But if that's not within your remit, it's okay. But at least once the problem is solved, which is really communicating to at least Cabinet, I would believe, or the Ministry of Energy.
We do not report to Cabinet. We are an entity that is coming through the parliamentary process, and our role is really there to ensure that the procedures that have been administered by the relevant Ministry of Finance, Control of Accounts, who are the bodies that is really responsible for ensuring the integrity of the accounting framework and the accounting system throughout the service, is being adhered to. So we try to help as much as possible by highlighting these significant weaknesses and highlighting the risk areas, with the hope that between the control of accounts and the entity to which the matter is being reported, that redress would be taken care of. We also serve the Public Accounts Committee, so that if the Public Accounts Committee desires us to look further into this, then we certainly can do so.
Well, simple, I would say that if you could, there are some follow-up questions, and maybe I would address that afterwards. One is, I noticed that the arrears on taxes on income and profits is now 25 billion plus, okay? But that is a reduction on the year before, I think. Can you explain what happened in terms of the reduction? Was it negotiated, or were taxes paid? And secondly, why it persists in being pretty high, which is 25 billion. I mean, 25 billion to the Treasury is half of the budget, you know.
Okay, there was a significant reduction in that figure because the chairman of the BIR, what was explained, they decided to remove monies under objection or under appeal, where collection may be in doubt. So I guess on the grounds of prudence, they decided to remove it, not write it off, but remove it from the total based on possibility of collection.
Okay, so would those negotiations for about $15 billion, as I remember, be ongoing?
Yes, it would be. If it's under appeal or there's some objection, there will be some process to follow by both parties.
So they have been removed as arrears because they are in negotiation?
Yeah, and there's some doubt whether it would be collectible.
Collectible or not?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. And what about this high number, $25 billion, which is about half of our annual budget, a little less?
Okay, I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't have these specifics.
Okay.
So we can follow up with that part of it.
All right, I'll ask Senator Gopi-Skoon to proceed.
Thank you very much. I'm a little concerned, not a little concerned, I'm quite alarmed about the status of the refurbishment of the residence in Geneva. And you would have audited that project, or you would have certainly visited the offices. In September 11th, on 8th September 2011, the Cabinet approved the refurbishment of the official residence in Geneva at a cost of $13.7 million. A couple of years later, in 21st May 2015, the Cabinet approved a revised cost of $27.3 million for the refurbishment, which is a 100% increase. Notwithstanding, the actual cost to 18th December 2015 was already $24.9 million. And at the time of your visit, work was still in progress. This is in August 2017. My first inquiry is to what percentage of the project had been completed at the time of your visit. You were not specific as to that, or I'm not sure if that was within your remit. But what you stated here is that the project is still in progress. I'm inclined to ask what percentage of the project has been completed. What concerns me as well is the fact that no tenders committee was used for the selection of of a contractor for the refurbishment project. And further, Cabinet did not approve, with regard to the refurbishment, specific matters. For instance, the installation of a double-furnished professional second kitchen, with 2 of each major appliances and fully stocked with utensils, a kitchen elevator, a smart toilet with washer and dryer, and a bathtub with spa jets. And I'm wondering, my concern here would be on whose authority Cabinet not having approved these large and excessive purchases and grandiose items. On whose authority were these purchases made?
Okay, when we visited, we were not able to determine the actual percentage completion, but we would say, I would venture to say it was over 90%. It was almost complete. They were working on the yard and various aesthetic things. The other thing about the kitchen, we were informed that the ministry actually approved the refurbishment to include all of this, but we didn't see any evidence of as such.
But the Cabinet did not approve these particular items.
What we did is, because it was such a large difference in the amount of money that was spent, we went through and we looked at what Cabinet approved and tried to match it with what was there. And we did not see any of these in the Cabinet approval or the information submitted to Cabinet.
So in other words, these may have been approved by the then ministry?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question in relation to the pervasive issues related to your individual areas of concern that was listed, and that's to do with what you found with lease agreements. And it says here that rent paid by ministries and departments during 2017 was in excess of $790 million. It went on to say that in the absence of written executed lease agreements, it could prove more difficult to enforce the state's rights under the agreement, leaving the state in a potential more vulnerable legal position. And it went on to say that the public's interest is not best protected where lease agreements remain informal and unexecuted. So my concern or question is, how then does these lease agreements, or having this excess of $790 million that you would have found, really impact or affect the audit process or the auditing of the public accounts? Because I saw the facial expression. So I also saw that, for example, one of your comments was no Cabinet approvals for 21 properties, and you had a total cost. So if there's no Cabinet approvals, then how do you know the total cost? Because you had it for numerous rental, lease, accommodation. So I guess you total all of that, and that's where you came up with this figure. But now, how this really impacts, or how this affects you, and also how would you suggest that this issue be addressed? It's a lengthy question, I'm sorry.
Well, the contract would detail the amounts to be paid in the first place. A signed contract is also the authority to make these monthly payments. Another issue is repairs and maintenance. We have come across a lot of ministries, departments, or offices where it could be improved. Some repairs are needed. So the contract would also detail who is responsible for what repairs, what are they supposed to maintain, and this kind of thing. If we can't find a contractor, if no contract is available, expenditure may be incurred that is not a responsibility of the ministry, say in terms of the repairs and maintenance. So all these things need to be clarified up front. Sometimes when the contract has expired, we can't find it at all. So you have new people coming into the ministries You have new people in charge. You would know who is responsible for what. So these are the kinds of things that we think should be attended to.
So are you saying, for example, this service commissions, right? So cabinet approvals were not seen for the rental of 3 properties, and it went on to say that total about 10 million, right? So are you saying that you saw the contract for these 3 properties, but you didn't see the cabinet approval? That's why you know it's about $10 million? Is that what you're saying?
Sorry, what?
Let me just first explain that a lot of times what happens, again, these things are systemic problems that exist in the process that is occurring with regard to. Now, it's not necessarily that the entity or the accounting officer is in flagrant disregard of not having a cabinet approval. They may have had a cabinet approval for an existing lease. But for the renewal of the lease, there is a process that is required, starting with the Ministry of Public Administration, under which the unit is placed for the rental. They are responsible for taking the request forward to Cabinet, not the line ministry per se. What happens is the valuation division has to get into play to determine the rate that should be accepted for the renewal of the lease. And because we are dealing with rentals for almost all the entire ministries and departments, what you will end up having is the valuation date is inundated with requests for this. So there's a time delay in which the cabinet approval is actually granted. In the meantime, the ministry generally says for the entity to continue to pay the existing lease rental, which may not necessarily be the invoiced lease rental, to continue to pay that until such time they have negotiated the rate with the landlord and cabinet has agreed to that rate. So there is the process in itself creates bureaucratic delays that impacts on the ministry's ability to have the correct authorization and approvals in place. That being said, you may wish to continue, Gary.
Well, I have a question on that. So is the valuation division that needs to strengthen, or is it the appropriation or the public administration, I believe, needs to strengthen? What is the weakest link then? Because you're saying there's a delay that affects the cabinet approval.
I don't want to say what is the weakest link. It's just that the system is very bureaucratic and the process in itself is time consuming. Because if every ministry has to go through this one entity in order to get their approvals granted and their approvals for rent going forward, and that negotiation is being handled by one entity, and that negotiation is based on a valuation that must be a government evaluation, it cannot be a paid external evaluation, then you have this one department who also has other requirements, also having to look at and negotiate with the valuation of this, the true value, the market value that is being asked for this particular rental. So we are looking at it from a system point of view. The question needs to be asked, does that system need to exist for accountability and good governance? That is not our remit.
But before you go there, then I should ask is, does this even affect your audits of the public accounts?
What you're looking at is an internal control issue. Now remember, authorization of expenditure requires cabinet approval and contracted agreements. We recognize that yes, the ministry is challenged in order to doing that, but at the same time we have to draw reference to it in terms of a control issue, because as it stands, you are not authorized to spend that money, but you are you are housed there. The landlord certainly expects to be paid, and he must be paid something. But so there is a disconnect between the controls that have been established and what is actually taking place.
Okay, all right. I'll move away. Well, I have one more question, but I could probably leave it. You want me to leave it for the next round, or?
We'll ask other members if they have any questions. You have a general question?
And then I'll after.
Okay, so taking into consideration the entire report, what would, and this is for the public to really understand, what would you say are some of the most critical deficiencies in the system that you were able to identify? And then what would be some of your top 5 recommendations?
There's one in me.
For 2 minutes.
Okay.
Repeat again, please.
I'm saying that taking into consideration the report, right? Because we know usually the reports usually garner a lot of public interest. You looking at this report, what would you identify as the most critical deficiencies in the system, and what would be your top 5 recommendations?
Go ahead, yeah.
One of the deficiencies.
Why don't you pick 2 or 3 most important things that you would like fixed? Yeah, 2 or 3 things that you would like fixed.
Well, the first one that comes to mind will be the development of an IFMIS system and implementation across the board. First one.
Revenue, yeah.
Okay, and okay.
I think Mr.
And what would you recommend to fix that?
That's a very difficult question, but as it stands, and I allude back to the comment that you made earlier, the extent in which the IFMIS system has been on this topic
Yes.
of discussion
Without full implementation.
without full implementation. So to me, it needs to be addressed in a very urgent manner, because it has been, and this is my personal view, that this has been a number of years in which this has been on the agenda. And it needs to be reached past a talk point, and it needs to reach the stage where we are actually beginning to implement. I think we were also looking in terms of revenue, and the way revenue is collected and accounted for, and I allude back to the discussion that I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce it.
Obika.
Mr. Obika has alluded to, in terms of the stringent measures and economic conditions that we are in at present, and where we are not able to assess with any great deal of reliability whether the full amount of revenue is actually being being collected. And that speaks to the method of gathering revenue data, the production data being one of them, the method of accounting for taxes, the systems of negotiating objections and appeals, the system of VAT, as whether or not VAT is really being collected, and all persons who are required to pay VAT, whether they're doing it in a timely manner. All of these sorts of things speaks to revenue control and the monitoring of the revenue system. We recognize that we have been deficient in that over the years that we have focused predominantly on the expenditure side, but we recognize at this point that revenue has become a critical issue, and that we are seeking to move ourselves away from just strictly focusing on the recurrent expenditure and DP expenditure, and look at improving our own methodologies in terms of getting a better sense of what are the gaps as it relates to revenue collection. And so I think that those 2 key areas are here. We also spoke to the issue of the internal audit and the strengthening of the internal audit. Because as a department and as an accounting entity, one would like to rely on the work of the internal audit to reduce our audit scope and not to duplicate efforts in the same area. In order to place reliance, you would need to be assured that the quality of their work is at the standard, that the persons undertaking the work are qualified to do so. we have spoken at length previously and at the other committee forums that the internal audit function is bogged down with doing operational type activities and not necessarily looking at operations and improvements in the operations. For example, we spoke this morning of the pension and leave records. A pension and leave record cannot leave a department until the internal auditor or auditors have reviewed the pension and leave record. And in order to review that, of course, they have to go back to the source documentations and that sort of thing. So the internal audit function is bogged down themselves in doing operational type activities, and therefore it prevents them in a sense from doing a real review of the control framework that exists in their particular ministry or department. So we are thinking that the question of reforming of the internal audit and looking at it holistically as to what value and benefit it can have, not only for the ministries and departments but also value that can be added to our work as well. So I think those are the key areas. I think add something as well.
I would like to add also that the whole management of information systems across ministries and departments need to be looked at. You need to have collaboration between all the ministries. You need to have a central body that ensures that IT systems are done in the most procured and implemented in the most efficient and effective manner that covers the needs of government as a whole. So simple, you might find that one entity has biodata, but another entity would procure a system to collect the same biodata, when you could have had all of that information in a central repository that has been validated so that any ministry could use. And another issue that we have come upon is that you have information systems being implemented, and then there's a change in management, government, and these projects are stopped, and they start looking for a new system. So we had one instance where we had 62,000 persons enrolled in a biometric smart card system, and then the whole thing was put on hold, and now I think they are looking for something else. And another ministry, we have a similar issue. So we need proper IT management and governance to be able to, reduce the wastage that occurs and to be able to have efficient information delivery to all the people that need it.
Okay, I wonder if I could follow up on some of the issues that you raised there. You wanted to raise something? You also? All right, okay. Let me proceed with this, and then, because it's directly related. You highlight the internal audit function and the integrated financial management systems, but there are, and you mentioned the pervasive issue of IT management and how it would basically make for the elimination of redundancy and duplication and perhaps inconsistencies within the system. But there are two things that I want to flag here, which is that one is that there is an entire chapter that basically addresses the issue of the link between the planning function and the public administration function. I think this is chapter 3.
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5, sorry. Okay? And basically that's the thrust of it, which is it basically says, look, if you don't get these things right, you're going to have a deficiency in the management of your entire governmental apparatus, your public administration system. Given where you know that the system is now, because you can tell from your auditing what are the deficiencies, what needs to be done in relation to that?
We have had discussions with the Ministry of Public Administration, and they have started working on collaboration between the various users, the various people that need to be considered, which include the Comptroller of Accounts, and we suggested to them also the Ministry of Planning, the Budgeting Division, and the various entities, and they have actually put things in place to now start the collaboration. One problem we raised with them is that a number of the people that they have are contracted people. So what happens when the contracts are not renewed? You know, they need to ensure continuity and all of that. So they have actually started working on the recommendations, but the continuity is what we need to make sure happens.
Okay, but I mean, think of the pieces here. You have the IRIS system with HR. You have the integrated financial management system that we're trying to bring on board. You have the pension issues that are not yet, that are half integrated and half not integrated, or partially anyway. You have the whole system that basically is not aligned to budget and planning and projects and so on. I mean, this is a major, major challenge for governmental administration. I mean, and you have other issues that are outstanding. I mean, you highlight the procurement issue at the beginning of the of your report. And that is another issue. I don't know if you're in a position to say where that is and what is the impact. I mean, if you don't have that procurement system proclaimed and the procurement regulator and his office, in fact, in place, what is the status of procurement that is taking place currently, for instance, and how is that going to be accounted for ultimately? I mean, those are important issues. I mean, I know I've issued a mouthful there, and it's a number of issues that are connected but now disconnected. But from an auditing point of view, aren't these things critical for your, critical assessment for your objective assessment of what is happening in the governmental system?
If I may speak, and then I would certainly let Ms. Maraj speak. What I'm hearing you talking about is value for money, in a sense, which this report obviously is not focused on. Ms. Maraj actually is, the ability to speak the way Ms. Maraj has spoken has to do with the fact that she is in charge of the value for money section. We've always been trying to expand on that section, but of course, because we are continuing to be in this limited human resource cycle that we are in, we're not able to take away sufficient amount of our staff that is responsible for this type of audit and focus it onto the value for money section. But there is a recognition that there needs to be a greater look, because if we look at best practice across the board of auditing entities of public sector auditing across the board, a greater amount of emphasis is placed on allocating resources to value for money, to doing value for money style of audits, because obviously, based on the caliber of questions that we have received here, they lend themselves more to that type of audit than looking at the accounts or looking at a regulatory framework and saying whether or not there is compliance or lack of compliance thereof. Both have their value, but I think in these economic times, I think there's a need to look at, as Ms. Maraj has alluded to, wastage and the economic benefit of entering into and acquiring processes in individual silo-like type behavior, which would increase the cost and may not necessarily be more effective, and therefore negating the benefit that could have been achieved if there was a greater holistic view of looking at things. You spoke of procurement. The procurement regulator's role is actually a very strong one. And that body would require ministries and departments to produce reports on an annual basis, and not only reports, but to strategically identify what are their procurement needs at the onset of a budgetary period. So therefore, you're already speaking of an interface that needs to be made with the IFMIS system, the budgetary system, and the system of procurement, and the information that has to be related to the procurement regulator. I am not sure if the various entities that are going after these systems are actually looking at it holistically and seeing that there's an integration that needs to be seamless in order for an effective process to occur. So that because there needs to be interface. There needs to be an interface with the procurement and the IFMIS system so that the information from a budgetary point of view that we as a ministry or department has to produce would also be able to be related to the procurement regulator and the Office of the Procurement Regulation so that they will know, okay, at the beginning of the year, we seek to procure these items of expenditure that has been approved. Because if you are seeking to produce this, but budget has not approved it, then you are giving information to the procurement regulator that is of no use and of no purpose, and they would be spending time looking at something that you're not able to procure because you have not been granted the necessary budget allocations. So there needs to be an interface of the information with the relevant database that is being required to be produced. And as we speak to that as well, is it that each ministry and each department is going to produce their own database? Is that cost effective? Or is it that there is a need to transcend that to a higher level and a more holistic level and say, this is the database that is going to be utilized and shared amongst ministries and departments? Yeah. We have been unable to assess whether that conversation is taking place.
Well, Ms. Mirage mentioned issues having to do with conversations between administration, planning, and I forget which other ministry, but I mean, that is what is required. You can't, I don't think you can do this thing without the planning ministry, I'm being quite frank with you. And I don't think you could do this without finance. So, because that is where all the money comes from. And you have to have those ministries involved, and public administration is really only the executing agency, so to speak, to make sure that what they agree between finance and planning actually happens for the government system. And you know, public administration is just the do-how of the system. And because the public administration of government falls under its jurisdiction, you know, and the key in that is IT stability. And sustainability so that you could have a holistic system that integrates all these things that we are talking about. And from an auditor's point of view, I think it's important for you to flag that, or else, I mean, you will end up auditing a dysfunctional system from which you cannot get the information you need. Am I not correct?
Yes, sir, you are correct.
That's exactly what is going to happen.
Yeah, so what we have been doing since the last audit report, and now we have been building on it, is trying to identify the key players and get them speaking to each other. So we have been trying to do that, apply value for money concepts to IT governance. The Ministry of Public Administration is responsible for ICT policy for the whole of government. So we have engaged them. We have engaged the Ministry of Planning to an extent, and also the Controller of Accounts. And of course, budget and division is very important to include in that. So as I said, we got the undertaking from the Ministry of Public Administration to include the key players in this collaboration. And they have assured us that our recommendations are being taken into account when they do the national ICT plan.
Okay, before I go on to Member Mitchell, I just wanted to remind you of the question that Senator Obika asked in terms of what we are seeking here with regard to the preparation of the numbers for energy. If you could indicate to us what you feel would be the recommended approach to ensure accuracy of auditing of the, let's just say auditing before it comes to you by the Ministry of Energy of the production numbers from the individual oil companies. I bear in mind that based on your reports, we interviewed the Ministry of Energy, this Public Accounts Committee, and they indicated that they were moving to technological, some kind of instrumentation or some kind of technical instrument for the monitoring of this on a continuous basis. And the cost of that was not, as I remember, very high. It was under $2 million. So perhaps that could be part of what you recommend, that they execute that technical aspect of it to make sure that they can monitor the production system in a reasonable way. But you should also indicate how we might monitor that very important side of our energy revenues, and the potential for energy revenues. And bear in mind that all the production that we are getting now is not so much from oil, but from gas, and that all new exploration in all waters, once negotiations are completed, are going to be for natural gas in our waters, by and large. So it really is the monitoring of the gas that is more important than anything else. Okay, Minister Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Madam Deputy Auditor General, I'm looking at Chapter 2, Expenditure, and I am noticing in the individual areas of concern this pervasive issue of the absence of contract agreements to support expenditure. Just trying to put things into context, is it a problem with the filing systems in these ministries and departments, or is it just a slowness to produce the documents? Because I find it difficult to believe that, the ministry, through the accounting officer, would enter into a contract with a contractor, and the terms and conditions are not known to both parties in a document. So could you just comment on that?
I think I would tend to agree with you. I think what happens is because we are a manual-based and a paper-based society and entity, a lot of these contracts may have been entered into some time back. And the way ministries store their data and able to retrieve their data, it may be actually in a closed file. That closed file may have gone to some sort of storage site somewhere. They may not have kept proper records as to where it went or when it went or how it was sourced. Files have a way of walking and disappearing in the public service and then reappearing. So yes, I think it's an issue of more documentation and recording and securing information that is vital for ensuring that control is maintained. And I think from my perspective, I don't know what Mr. Caesar and others would wish to add to that. Mr. Caesar, do you
just
want to add?
quickly ask, piggyback on that. Is it that, or have you noticed, I know that there is a tracking system, a file tracking system, electronic tracking system that some ministries may have implemented. Do you believe, or is it in your experience, you've noticed that those ministries would have less of these issues present?
I wouldn't want to make a pronouncement on it because we have not actually, I recognize and I do know of two particular entities that have actually engaged that process. I believe it's a recent process, so therefore I would not be able to say how successful it is, but it is something that we can flag and we can look at that, but one of the particular departments, because actually one of those departments is referenced here as not producing contracts. So that we will have to look and see, since they have implemented this tracking system, if it is working and if they are now better able to serve to produce the documentation that is required. That is something that we will have to flag and get back to you on that.
Okay. Also, Is it the Auditor General's function, the Office of the Auditor General's function, to also go back in time to check to see whether or not these absent matters have been produced? And does the Auditor General's office do an analysis to determine whether these matters of concern are actually getting better?
I would let Mrs. Peters speak in terms of the responses, but we do follow up in terms of our recommendations, and we do track whether or not our recommendations are being adhered to, and what. In so doing, we seek to inquire what are the challenges being faced by the particular ministry or department in actually implementing our recommendation. But Mr. Peters,
so for example, in 2016, let's look at the absence of the lease agreements. Can you say, through some analysis, that in 2017 the system was improved, that the Ministry of Public Administration through the Presidency Department, they improved the system of, taking these matters to cabinet and getting these leases done on time?
I would say that there is an attempt to improve the system, but I would not want to say whether or not it has occurred so, because we have not actually tested it or verified to the extent to which the improvements have actually impacted. But speaking as a department which is also awaiting approval for rental, I would say that since 2015, 2016, and 2017, we have been writing the relevant ministry requesting that the necessary negotiations be undertaken. We have been assured that it is close to being completed in the year 2018. I don't know if that could answer the question to you in terms of improvements.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question in relation to the statement of public debt. I don't want to say the amount, but I just wanted to ask if this takes into consideration the state enterprises debt.
Yes, it would.
So all local loans, external loans, and state enterprises.
Yes.
As in companies and.
Yeah.
What is being paid by the state?
Right. Under the statements of public debt, you would see a listing of all the loan instruments and also by the entity. So you would see the state enterprises, the statutory authorities, and so on listed there.
I just want to clarify that the statement represents those debts that has been guaranteed by the state. If the individual state enterprise, which is a legal entity in its own right, has entered into negotiations with regard to their company, and it is not guaranteed by the state, it would not be reflected in the statement of public debt.
So the Petrotrin debt, for instance, would not be reflected here?
No.
You were alluding to a list of the entities. You want to share where you have that information?
Okay, that would be part of the Treasury's accounts. But we have some extracts in the back.
So that's chapter 6,
yeah.
right?
So we have some copies of Treasury statements from around page 133. So you would see an example of the part of the statements of public debt.
133?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Right. As we're on the issue of debt, if we look at page 130, Treasury Statement 8, we are seeing the amount authorized to be raised. So you can let me know if I'm reading this correctly. And then the present debt is 5 billion in excess, 5.5 billion in excess for line item 9 in Roman numerals, development loans. So it's 35 billion, and the amount authorized is 30 billion. Mm-hmm. Can we get, and as well, I'm seeing external loans, there is also The present debt is also higher than the amount authorized by 2.5 billion. Can we get some information on that as at September 30th, 2017?
Okay, I'll have to go back to the work files to get the specifics on that.
What normally obtains when this scenario happens, when the debt is higher than the amount authorized to be raised?
I think it's just a matter of raising the ceiling on the particular act. It's usually done via legal notice, I believe.
Another point I just want to raise quickly is regarding the Exchequer. The Exchequer being in overdraft, it increased from 5+ to 10+ billion. Well, the Exchequer is from Treasury Statements 2 through 6, right?
1/6.
Treasury Statements 2 through 6 cites the Exchequer, but I think on page 149, there's a summary statement, the consolidated statement of assets and liabilities that has also the summary balance as 10.6 billion. We know that that's the overdraft position, but what I would want to find out, given that more than 6 months has elapsed since then, is there any improvement in the position at the Exchequer, given the overdraft?
We have not looked at any updated figures on the Exchequer account yet.
No, would you like us to? Would you like us to provide that information? Because we certainly can.
Would be very grateful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe we can provide it.
Soon you have other questions? Anyone? Senator Henry? Senator, MP Mitchell? You have questions? All right. A couple of issues. I see the central bank overdraft is perhaps at the highest that it has ever been, and you have expressed some concerns about how the overdraft is in fact configured. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Really, it's a course of presentation, so it would actually stand out. So it would be easily discernible what the actual overdraft is. It's I think it's best practice as well to have it shown like that.
It's best practice to have it shown as it is.
Separately, I should say separately.
Okay, all right. So what would you like to see?
Sorry, what would you like to see?
What would you like to see in terms of presentation?
There's a clear. Yeah, it's just it's actually supposed to be shown as a liability separately.
Okay. And you feel that would more accurately reflect the state of the accounts?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anybody else who has another question? If not, I'm going to wrap up at this point. You have any more questions? All right. Thank you very much. I want to thank members of the Auditor General's office for being here, but before I get to the end, I want to ask one question, which is about the condition of the Auditor General's office itself. Now, we've seen all the problems of the public service and the challenges, the difficulties, the recurrent problems, etc. Is the Auditor General's office equipped to deal with an effective and ongoing supervision and auditing of the governmental accounts of Trinidad and Tobago at the present time in terms of human resource capability, in terms of the configuration of qualifications, the numbers of people that you need in order to do the work, etc. Can you say a little bit about that? What is your situation? Because if you are not equipped to do your work, I think we have a big problem.
I think the Auditor General has spoken, and he has spoken at this forum and at other forums, that we suffer with a human resource limitation. In terms of our established positions as they stand today, at the technical level, the lowest technical level, which will be the officers who would be equipped to go out and actually do the field surveys and to do the actual work, at that level, we have 44 vacancies. Be that it is may, the Service Commission has indicated to us that they're in the process of conducting interviews because the positions were advertised and they were inundated with a lot of applicants. So in that regard, they undertook an examination and from which they have screened those applicants and have put them on some sort of merit list, and that interviews should be soon, within this financial year, be taking place. However, even though the interviews may take place, we do have a limitation in terms of funding, because at present, if the person's list is provided to us, we would not be able to bring them on board because our allocation is we don't have the money. Yeah. So we're sort of in a chicken and an egg type of situation.
But you are proceeding with the interviews.
But we are proceeding with the interviews. And we are proceeding at the interviews at two levels. The other level is the qualification levels. To that extent, we have an establishment of 10. Our entry-level qualification is an establishment of 10 in which you are required to be an ECCA graduate. And or someone of or another professional qualification that is accepted by ICAT. However, the Service Commission did in fact advertise for that particular position, but they have not proceeded thus far to indicate to us when interviews would be scheduled or whether they're in a position at this point to schedule those interviews. Now, the position of the qualified officer position is very much a necessary one because we are moving into the realm of looking at, as you saw today, a more complex type of transactions being taken place. I mean, if we really want to focus on the accounts, we need to focus on the treasury. And therefore, we need to focus on the complexity of the transactions that is taking place in the Treasury. And on that basis, you will need a level of officers whose competencies and qualification is certainly a little bit higher than just a technical one. The other issue that we're looking at is also the training and moving forward in terms of these new advances. Just for example, given one of our clients is in the mutual fund business. And therefore, because they're in the mutual fund business, they come under a particular piece of legislation from the Exchequer, and they come under the Anti-Money Laundering Act. Therefore, we need to have that competencies and skills as well. So therefore, we need to retool our officers because we are required and mandated to produce and audit those particular things. So we need to have training in that level. Environment is a big issue within the auditing world, public sector auditors across the board. Environmental auditing has a significant cost, and we're seeing that actually right now in terms of our own waters, in terms of the levels of pollution that we're seeing in terms of the plastic. We do not have the competencies for that. So as the world becomes more complex, we need to be on top of it. Our methodologies cannot stay stagnant. While we've retooled, the methodologies continue to move on and to advance. So we always need to have an extensive research unit. Our research unit at present is consistent of one officer. That certainly cannot be adequate in terms of the complexities of things, of transactions and operations that are taking place in the environment that we work in right now. I mean, if you look at the ministries, each of them are unique and complex in their own right. Health is complex. Education is complex. Energy is complex. And each of them would require our officers to have an intimate knowledge of that entity in itself, of what that entity is supposed to do, and what are the gaps and weaknesses We do not have the manpower to focus on that type, but that is the nature in which our work needs to move forward to bring value to you and to bring value to the public sector at large. So our training definitely needs to be beefed up, but we come back to the proverbial problem that there is insufficient funding to finance of all of these things. So we have to strategize differently in terms to try and make ourselves be better at what we are mandated to do. And I will just close with that particular statement at this point in time.
Last question. I'm at chapter 6, Deputy, page 103. So you would have signaled here that there are several non-performing loans. And these non-performing loans deal with, among others, other governments, Grenada, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And under other governments, the total is approximately $277 million. Can you indicate how long these loans are non-performing, and how long before would they be written off or identified by you as bad debt?
These are policy decisions that have to be taken at the policy level. If one was to speak at a strictly accounting position, yes, I would say in some instances the loans are over a 20-year period, definitely. But this is a policy decision. It is from an accounting position, if we were dealing with this in the real world, and we were dealing with this as a financial statement, this would have had to have been written off quite some time ago. But it is a policy decision, and we would not want to embark on that road to dictate what the policy should and should not be.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the members of the Auditor General's Department, led by Acting Auditor General Pujadas this morning, and all the members who came and answered so forthrightly with the issues. We really appreciate our collaboration with the Auditor General's Department, because it is a collaboration. We try to understand what you do, and we try to see how we can help to make it better, make you better at what you do, even if it is only by recommendations and some push on some of the ministries to cooperate more reasonably with you, and by trying to see that you are perhaps better resourced. We want to thank the media also for being here, and we hope that they will report to the public some of the things here so that the public will be aware of how the government operates, what the Auditor General's office does, and how the Public Accounts Committee helps in the process of accountability of the entire governmental system. And I want to give you the assurance that some of the issues that came up here today, for instance, the human resource issues of the Auditor General's office, where you don't have the money, although you are doing the interviews, I'm sure my colleagues will agree that we can make a recommendation which says, let's strengthen the Auditor General's office and don't put them in a situation where they don't have the resources. And we will also try to look at some of the issues that you've raised, certainly the internal audit issues, the integrated public management issues. We will flag again the issues related to procurement, the ICT issues, and the global or more comprehensive view of public administration, that it can assist in strengthening the governmental apparatus and ensuring accountability. And we want to remind you that you have something to tell us on the energy monitoring issue. And how basically, if you can tell us anything about how we might strengthen that integrated approach. Ms. Maraj, you might want to think about that a little bit with the ICT, where you've gotten and where we need to go, where the government has gotten and where we need to go to strengthen the system. I think that would be valuable. And any other questions we have, we'll ask of you, and I know that you will respond quickly. And well, what can I say? Thank you very, very much, and we will look carefully at the verbatim notes and see out of that what recommendations we can give. I want to let you know that right now what we are looking at, and we are going to have a few minutes specially spent on that next time, is that we are going to look at all the recommendations that we've made based on the 2015 auditor's report on 2016. We're doing 2017 now, and on the basis of the responses from the ministries, in a collective endeavor, we will see how we can respond to some of the issues to make sure that some of the recommendations are in fact executed. And of course, we'll do the same again for 2017 once we are finished with the report, and we can strengthen some of the recommendations, because we don't want the recommendations to just become reports in Parliament not acted upon. Some of the recommendations are acted upon, some of them there are challenges with difficulties, like the one I mentioned with the Auditor General and the I can't remember what it was now. Huh? The Board of Inland Revenue issue, and I think that there was another one where the Ministry of Finance said that really it was their charge to try and deal with the issue. So we have to find a way of making the system work, and we certainly want to work with you to make that possible, so that the system becomes more transparent, more accountable, and the country gets more value for money in the entire process. In the meantime, I will tell you from the point of view of discernment here, just listening to you, I think besides all the big issues that you talk about, the environment and that kind of accounting and so on, I think that there are three basic issues you now have to deal with as the Auditor General. One is the revenue question, which has become a dominant concern. The second issue is the expenditure situation, which has been your forte. You look at how the money is spent. And the third one is the value for money proposition, which really requires an integrated look at how the system operates and how the money from the entire system is managed. So that is not just an expenditure function. It is really an issue involving procurement. It involves expenditure. It involves how the system operates. It involves duplication, all of those things that you have to look at. So I think the Auditor General's office, besides the hard futuristic questions about the environment and so on, which we need to do, but these key ones, revenue, expenditure, and the value for money question, I think that will strengthen the way the government operates and the way the Auditor General sees how the government operates. Okay? So thank you very, very much.